All right, it is time for our final lesson for finishing out our rig. Of course, there's other things that we can do with this, right? But we've got a pretty robust setup going on now. So let's go ahead and finish up by making a jaw and eye control. And we have a lot of chaos going on in our outliner over here. So I want to take a moment to clean that up and get our rig ready to ship out for production. So first we'll make a jaw and eye control, right? Using some new constraints. We'll clean up the outliner, and then we'll finally tuck things into display groups as we've done before, so we can have this nice and clean and ready to send off to our animators. So to begin, we'll make a jaw control because the jaw is fairly easy. Right now what I want to do is I want to create a control curve and put it in front of the jaw, right? So that would make actual sense for our rig. And let's go over how to do that. So I'm going to start with a regular curve this time. I can go ahead and double check in my curves and surfaces, or my curves control script, and I might look for something that might give me what I want, but actually a lot of these are just regular shapes, and I want something a little more oblong and irregular for the jaw. So let's just go ahead and create a control for it, and we'll use some control vertices to warp it into a more, fitting shape. So I'll go over to my Curves and Surfaces tab and click the circle to create a NURB circle. As always, I do want to get this, aligned up and shaped how I'd like it before I end up constraining it and freezing transforms. So I'll go ahead and scale it up, rotate it forward a little bit. And my girl's geometry is getting in the way, so I'll go ahead and turn the visibility off. Hold down V on my keyboard and snap this up to the jaw. All right, looking good. So I'll go ahead and bring that forward. Bring my visibility back. And right now we just have sort of a lump, right? We have a circle that's just in front of her face, but it doesn't really look like much of a control that would tell our animators that it's for a jaw. So I'll go ahead and smush this down as well. And what I'll do is I'll reshape this, and I might even scoot it closer to the face. I'll reshape this using what are called control vertices to sort of, influence how this looks, and we'll try to wrap this shape around her actual jaw a little bit. It doesn't have to be exact or precise, right? But we can modify the shape ever so slightly to give us something closer to what we want. So with my NURB circle selected, I'm going to hold down right click and go over to Control Vertex. So now, as you can see here, I get access to a bunch of little purple dots that when I click on them, highlight different parts of my control curve. If I click one and move it around with my move tool active, right, I start to distort the shape of my curve. And I'll go ahead and undo too before it's correct. And, you might even be able to turn on symmetry. I've had mixed results with this, but if I go over to my modeling toolkit and turn on Object X symmetry, it does look like I'm able to grab it and move it symmetrically. And just another little hotkey for that, you can also hold down Control, Shift, and right click, and hold all three of those down, and you can get access to the symmetry menu. So I can turn on or off symmetry that way. Right now I'm doing Object on X because of the way our Girl Geo is set up. That's how we get symmetry for both sides. But now that I have symmetry up, I'm going to go ahead and try and wrap this curve to vaguely be around the shape of her jaw. Oops, and if you click off, I'll just right click, go back to Control Vertex, and grab it again. Maybe I'll grab this one down here, it's protruding like the chin is. I can switch back to object mode and, scoot it back a little bit. And I might even scale this down a little bit more. Go back into Control Vertex. And now we can start shaping this up. There we go. I might even grab this, smush it down. Pull this back a little bit. Maybe get this to be shaped up around her cheek a little bit more. And maybe actually pull these forward and out a little bit. So obviously it's not an exact science, right? Like we can go through and mess with this all day to get us the shape that we want. But I just want a control curve to be, in front of the jaw and basically be sort of shaped around her jaw a little bit. And and I actually like that a lot. And the other thing that I do want you to notice, right, if I hop back into object mode, is that when I select this NURBS curve, right, pay attention to where the pivot point is, even as I might even isolate select and use my control vertex to move everything around. That pivot point is still in place. So, if you find yourself struggling with the placement of some of your, different curves, I can even go through and like retroactively reshape how my net curve is shaped without altering the pivot point. So that might be useful for you changing how your curves are laid out. I probably wouldn't try and do that with like all the fingers or anything, but that's something to think about. Let's go ahead and undo to before I scooted that forward, turn off my isolate selection and go back to object mode. And I might even scoot this forward just a little bit. Of course, you don't have to get that fancy with it, right? If you just want to use a curve or a lump, you can absolutely use that method as well. But I might pull this forward just a little bit. And now I'm ready to wire this up to my jaw. So a couple things that I do need to change is that I do need to alter my pivot when I constrain this over to it. And I do need to freeze transforms, as we've always done. Because right now there's a bunch of junk transforms in here, and we want that to be gone. So I'll go up to Modify, down to Freeze Transformations. Now this is all clean. And I'll turn off the visibility for my girl's geometry again so I can get access to the actual jaw joint, right? So right now this controls how her jaw looks. I'll go ahead and hide the visibility, grab my jaw curve, hold down D as in dog, and then V as in victory, and drag this back to snap it into place. I did grab those two axes, right, because this was made on the line of symmetry and it shouldn't matter. But now I have this jaw control working relative to that location. Now my pivot's there, right? So I can strain this up, I can orient it around, and it'll be all good. So I'll go ahead and name this, my jaw underscore CTL while I'm here. Go ahead and Control G to group it, and then hold down Shift and grab that jaw control so we can go up to Modify, Match Transformations, Match Pivots. So now my group has a pivot that's directly in the middle of my jaw joint as my jaw control. And like everything else, I'll make this my jaw CTL underscore GRP. All right, so last thing we need to do is we just need to constrain this to our jaw control, right? Let's go ahead and orient constrain it up so we can have the rotation, alter our jaw. So I'll go ahead and grab my curve, hold down Shift, and grab the actual jaw joint that I want to constrain to, right? And I'll go up to constrain, down to orient. It's like everything has gone as I had selected and as desired. So now I can grab this jaw control, right, rotate it down, and now my jaw will open and close. Great. All right, so now that we've got that set up, let's go ahead and use a similar tactic for the actual eyes. We'll probably use that mirroring trick that we did like with our pull vectors and our IK-FK controls, right? So I'll go ahead and create a curve. I think what I'll do is I will make one large curve that can hold both eyes, and I'll get the shape of that figured out, and then I'll make two small curves for both of the actual eyeballs so we can control those individually as well as together. So first thing I'll do is I'll create a little curve, right? I'll go up to our curves and surfaces and create another circle. Go ahead and hide the visibility on my girl's geometry. I'll change to my move tool, hold down V as in victory, and I'll grab just on the Y, right? So like we did with our spine controls, but I'll grab this little green handle and drag it up until it snaps to the level of both of our eyes. Great, great. I'll go ahead and pull it forward, bring back the visibility for my girl's geometry. Rotate this forward. I might even key in 90 degrees on X. And I'm going to do something a little bit different than what we've done before, right? So I'll hold off on freezing transforms for just a moment, and we'll sort of see why I'm doing that. I want to get these laid out first. So next, I want to go ahead and scale this out a little bit. Since this is going to be the control for both of her eyes, I do want the control to be, scaled up to be in front of both of her eyes. I can even go through again, right? Hold down right click and grab the control vertices, and maybe grab, these three out here, and then pull them aside so I have a different shape going on. And I do still have Object X symmetry on, right? I might even grab the edge and push it in a little bit so I get a little more square shape. Grab the top curve, smush it down. Bottom curve, smush it up. Just so I almost have kind of like a visor thing going on, right? But now our animators will know that this is, all set up and that this will hold both of our eyes. I still do have those junk transforms in it right now, right? And that's for a very particular reason. Let's go ahead and get some eye curves. That we have the one that will do both of them. Let's grab some for the individual eyes. So I'll hide my girl's geometry again, create another NURBS curve, go ahead and snap it up to the eye. And I didn't hold down just the Y, right? Since I can just snap this to the actual eyeball itself, that'll help us position our curves a little bit. I'll rotate this forward, and now I can start to bring it forward. Now it might need to be scaled down a little bit, right? So now that makes sense. But as you can see here, right, I can't quite get this lined up so it's perfectly inside this curve. And that's why we didn't, freeze transforms here yet. Is that I want to go ahead and take my original curve, right? I want to make this the parent of my child curve. So I'm just going to grab, my NURB circle 2, which in this case would be my LTI control, hold down Shift and grab the eye control for both and hit P to parent. And now we can see that the transforms over here have changed a little bit. My rotate X is 180 and my translate have just a little bit of junk in them. Now I don't want to mess with my scale, right? But I can zero those out. Actually, I want to zero out translate X, or actually I want to do translate Y. That's right. Okay. So by zeroing out translate Y, right, now these are flat and matched up with each other precisely. And even if I go to, orthographic left or orthographic side, and don't worry if yours is like oriented strangely, right? I'll use my view cube to fix it, but this is because I was working for a project in Unreal. But going over here and looking, right, these are flat up against each other, so we can use that little trick to align things up in space where they both need to be. You could have also copied and pasted that translate Y value by hand. Those are both valid methods, but that's why I wanted to do that before I froze transforms on everything. But for now, I'll use Shift P to unparent it, because I want to freeze those transforms independently of each other and start parenting things up. But before I do so, let's go ahead and stay organized and rename things. My NURB circle 1, I just want this to be my I underscore CTL. And my NURB circle 2, which is in front of the left eye, right, I want that to be my LT I CTL. Now we can go ahead and start freezing transforms. So I'll use Shift to grab both of these controls, go up to Modify, Freeze Transformations. Go ahead and group them up, and before I go much further, I'll go ahead and duplicate my LTI and mirror it over to the other side using those tactics that we've gone over before. I'll use Control G to group it, right? So now I have a pivot point that's perfectly at the origin of our world. I'll use Control D to duplicate it, and I'll set my scale X from +1 to -1. So now we have this mirrored over to be right in front of her other eye. I can, modify freeze transforms to bake that in. And let's go ahead and center the pivots on both of those. So I'll grab my group 2, hold down Shift and grab my group 3, go up to Modify, Center Pivot. So now I have pivot points directly in front of both of my eyes. I can go ahead and, rename those to LTI, CTL, GRP. And I'll copy that text. Oops, I guess I won't. I'll type in RTI, CTL, GRP. Again, if you want to use comment rename, that's also valid. And I'll rename this from LTI control to RTI control. So now we have this all set up. Last thing to do, right, is to take our ICTL, group it, and go ahead and shift select our ICTL with our group 2 selected. Modify, match transformations, match pivots. Oops, doesn't look like it went through. I'll just run that again. There we go. So now those pivots are in the exact same place. And once again, I'll rename this group to ICTL, capital GRP. So let's go ahead and constrain those up, and then we'll do some uses of parenting, right? You can probably see where we're going here to get this set up. But we'll go ahead and use what is called an aim constraint. This is why we needed to have our, our rotate axes facing forward, so we can use that to aim at these control curves. So, as always, the parent constrains the child, right? So I want to grab my control curve first, hold down Shift, and grab my joint second. And then again, with our menu set, change to rigging, we'll go up to constrain, down to aim. And we can take a peek in the options box, right? The only thing that we need to make sure is that maintain offset's on. There's a lot of other things like aim vectors that we don't need to mess with. But by default, our settings should have maintain offset on. Go ahead and click add. Now, if we go ahead and double check, right, by grabbing our control curve and move it around, now our eyes are following. And because of our skin weights, right, we're even following that around with us. Now our little eye socket is deforming, so that's nice. Go ahead and repeat that process for the other side. Go ahead and grab my curve, hold down Shift, and grab the eye joint behind the eyeball. Go up to constrain, down to aim. And now they're both moving. So right now, right, our eyes are moving independently of each other, which is kind of creepy. But we can set this up so we have, separate eye controls. But we can, again, make these groups just a child of our main eye control. So if we move the main eye control around, it'll move both of the eyes with it. So that's super easy, right? All we have to do is just make our eye control groups a child of the, the single eye control curve. So I'll just grab my RTI control group. I can hold down middle mouse and drag it on top of that ICTL. So again, we have that stair-step hierarchy going, right? We have group, curve, curve. And we can repeat that same process for the left eye control group. And I'll even use P to parent this time, right? So I'll grab my LTI control group, hold down control, grab my ICTL and hit P to parent. So now both eyes are a child of that control. So if I click this, right, my major eye control, the singular one, I can grab that and move that around, and now both of my eyes will move with it. And we can see over here, right, that I'm having a little bit of weights issues, and I'll go over what's up with that in just a moment. Same with on the other side. Great. I can zero those out, and we'll be back in location. All right. So this is our basic rig all finished up. We have a lot of functionality here. We have a lot going on, but it should work, right? But right now, the way things are set up is that if I click my root control, right, and I move this around, it's going to leave everything else behind, and we're going to get some weirdness. And, we can even take a moment and look back here, but her eyeballs are still aimed at that. Our jaw control, since it's only orient constrained, is okay. And I think, honestly, I might replace this orient constraint with not an aim constraint, but a parent constraint for the jaw, because I think that might give us a little bit of added functionality for our animators. So I'll very quickly just go click on the jaw joint, bring my cursor over to the outliner, hit F to find it. So I have jaw 1, I have that orient constraint. I'm actually going to delete that, and I'm going to grab my jaw control curve, shift select the actual jaw joint, and do a parent constraint by going up to constrain, down to parent instead. Functionally the same thing, right? But now if we need to exaggerate a little bit, we can actually move this a little bit more. So, isn't that just cute? All right. So, now that we have that set up, we need to fix this so, our root control moves everything, right? Because right now we're getting some weirdness, and, with the jaw, now the way it is, it's going to behave a lot more strangely. If we grab our neck control even and rotate it, our jaw is not going to move with it, which simply will not do. Our eyes are following and aiming in their own location, which just, this is kind of a mess, right? If I were an animator, I'd have a lot of difficulty messing with this rig. So let's just go ahead and clean up a little bit in our outliner and get this all set up for success. All right, so let's go ahead and just start parenting things up to where they need to be. Let's see here. So the first thing I think I'll do is our arms, right? Because right now we want to make it so if we move our spine 3 control, which moves our shoulders, is that our actual shoulders will move with it, right? We can even see Some of those connections from our IK-FK switches are still there, but obviously not dragging along with her, and we're getting some really weird deformations. So we're just going to use some good old-fashioned parenting. So with my spine 3 selected, I'm going to bring my mouse over to the outliner and hit F. So we have our spine 3 CTL. So we want some of our arm groups to be a child of that. So I'm going to select let's start with our LT FK shoulder group, and we can actually just find it here, right? So I'll grab my LT FK shoulder control group. Again, grabbing the actual group. This is what's being driven by our switch and everything we have set up, right? It has our junk in it. I'll hold down control, grab the spine 3 CTL, and hit P to parent. Again, we're still getting our stair-step hierarchy, right? We have a curve and then an empty group, followed by a curve and an empty group. So now if we grab our spine 3 control, our arms will move with it. Let's repeat that process for the right side, right? So I'll click on my RT shoulder controls. I can find it in the outliner by hitting F. So I want to grab that group, hold down control, grab my spine 3 CTL, hit P to parent. So now if I grab these right and move it with, everything will go with it. Good deal. But something we do want to check out, right, is that if we grab our FK switches and, set them both to 0, so we can pop into IK. Oops. Right now, our IKs aren't a child of that, right? So while we're getting some weirdness and some popping, we still do need to have our IK controls live under there as well. So this is my LT IK wrist hand, or my wrist control group. I'm going to grab that, hit control and grab my spine 3 CTL, hit P to parent, and repeat that same process for my RT wrist control group. P to parent. And even though we didn't grab the actual IK handles, right? Since those are parent constrained to our controls, it's okay. We'll come along with them, and we still will clean them up and put them in our hierarchy at large here. But now if we grab our spine controls, those will also move with it. So, we can stack our different transforms on that. If we grab our spine 1, everything will transform hierarchically. And now our IK hands as well as our FK hands will move with our spine. Right now this is freaking me out up here, so let's go ahead and fix what's going on with our jaw and eye controls as well. So I'll grab my neck control, hit F to find it, right? So just one level deeper than our spine 3 CTL. We do want to basically make our jaw and eye controls a child of this neck control. So whenever we move our neck, everything will move with it. So I'll scroll down, find my jaw control group, hold down shift and grab my eye CTL group. So just like with everything else, we grab both of them. I'll come back up to my neck CTL, hold down control and click on my neck CTL and hit P to parent. So now if we click our little plus menu down here, right, our groups are going to be a child of that. So if we grab our neck and move it, now those will go with it. Even if we look closely here at our eyes, right, our eyes are still staring straight ahead. So now our eyes will move with the neck. Go ahead and zero out my neck rotation, just to reset that to 0. And now if we click on this, right, we're getting a lot of things to move. We test our root control. We're getting some weird popping in our arms because our elbows aren't currently a child of that. Or our elbow pull vectors, rather, aren't a child of the root. Neither are our knee controls or our foot controls. So let's go ahead and get those up where they need to be as well. So right now we have a root control group, right? And our root control, that's going to be our curve. That's going to hold a lot of our groups. Let's go ahead and get our foot controls under there. So grab my LT foot control group, hold down control, click on my root CTL, use P to parent. So now if I grab my root control, it grabs my foot control as well. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for my RT foot control group. This time I'll just select it, click and hold down my middle mouse and drag it up under my root CTL. Because again, we're going for that stair-step hierarchy. We still have it going here, right? Even though we have multiple children, we still have an empty group as a child of our curve. And then underneath that, we have our curve group. And that's even going all the way down on our feet too, right? We have our empty group and then our foot curve. So now if we move our root control around again, right? We're mostly there, but if you pay close attention to our thighs and our elbows, right, we're getting some weirdness if we move past a certain threshold. So let's go ahead and stick our pole vectors here as well. So we got my LT elbow pole vector, my RT elbow pole vector. Let's find our LT knee pole vector and our RT knee pole vector. Grab my control group, or my control curve rather, and hit P to parent. So now we can move this girl wherever we want in space without having any of that strange distortion. Let's see here. Next up, let's grab our IK-FK controls, right? So we'll just find our switch controls. Controls. Nope, looks like I actually didn't put my LT in a control group. That's okay. I'll just control G. Modify match transformations, match pivots, and just rename it quite quickly. So this is why I save this stuff for last, right? This is our sort of a cleanup phase. This allows us to double check and see if anything's gone awry as we set this up, which, you know, there's a little bit that's busted here and there. So I am taking this opportunity to sort of go through and click and grab everything. So let's go ahead and grab our, let's see here, those are ankle controls. We don't need that. Let's grab our FK switch and IK switch control groups, drag them under my root CTL. And now everything will move with her. But now I know what you're saying, right? There's still a bunch of junk in here, right? Like I have this empty group that I don't know what it's probably, you know, used to mirror something over since it has a scale of -1. I'll delete that. Now I still have my hand controls here. And we can go ahead and get those parented up as well. So I think what I'll do is that now that I have this set up, I'll go ahead and start putting all this extra junk, or not necessarily junk, but different vital parts of our rig into their own group, which will make more sense as we set that up. But go ahead and trust me on this one, right? You know, we have our IK handles sort of hanging out. We have our reverse heels hanging out. We still have our root hanging out, and those hand controls as well. I do have an extra camera here that I just made, probably in class, so I'm just going to drag this down to the bottom, my outliner. So the next part is to set up a master control, which will sort of hold everything for us. You know, we've cleaned up a little bit, but it's still a little confusing. But this will allow us to scale and change the size of our girl and reposition her, as well as add like a second buffer so we can sort of place her in scene while still having this root control, have control over everything else. So I want to grab everything that's not my girl's geometry. So that includes my original root, as well as my reverse heels, you know, my IK handles, my root control, so the control that holds everything, and I'm going to group it. So I'm going to grab my root, hold down shift, go all the way down to my hand control, and use control G to group. So now this is our master control. So I can grab this group, right, scale it up, and our girl will scale with it. Previously, if we tried to, you know, grab everything at once and scale it, we were going to start to get some weirdness, which, you know, while it may be fine for her to have like a dumpy like this, right, it's not what our animators are going to need for most of our situations. So allowing us to have that master group that sort of passes its scale onto everything underneath it allows us to rescale our rig, you know, to whatever size it needs to be. You know, if we're going onto a different scene or we need to work on a different engine, we may need to scale our girl, right? So that will allow us to do so. But now that I got that set up, let's go ahead and rename our group 1. And we are going to do things a little bit inverted just for this very final group. So I'll make this just my master CTL underscore capital GRP. And I'm going to actually, you know, going against type for everything else that we've done, I'm going to make this a child of a control curve. So, you know, think about what you want your master control to be, right? Maybe I want to go ahead and go into my rigging tab and find my curve script. You know, maybe I want to grab something super fancy here. Let's see here. I could do a circle with 4 arrows. I could, you know, do a circle with 1 arrow just to say this is the correct direction that it's pointing forward. So maybe I'll do that. I'll go ahead and put a circle, 1 arrow, the origin, and scale it up. Right now it's facing backwards, right? So I'll go ahead and close this. Rotate it on Y to be negative 180 degrees. So it's pointing forward. And once again, like everything else, before we get this all constrained up, I do want to modify freeze transformations. And then I can just name this master underscore CTL and make my master control group a child of my master CTL. So I'll grab my control group, hold down control on my keyboard, grab that CTL last and hit P to pair it. So now I can grab this master control, I can scale it, and it will still pass on, our animators don't have to grab our actual group, and we can move this around. So now we can, use this to sort of as an override, move everything in the scene, but we still have our own separate control underneath of that our girl can move under. And, we can't scale this one right, but we can scale the master control. So I'll zero that out, and now that is set up. All right, very last couple things that we want to do is that maybe we want to either add some color to our curves, and that we want to go ahead and make it so our joints, while they have their own layer, we might need to clean up by adding a reverse heels to those layers, and we also might want to add a display layer for our actual control curves. So let's go ahead and add our reverse heels first to this joints layer. So I'll go ahead and bring those back. Just click on my reverse heels, right? I don't have to do a bunch of fancy work. I'll just click on them, hit F to find them in my outliner if I don't want to go diving. I can even shift select my RT reverse heel, go over to my joints layer, select it with left click, right click on it, and add selected objects. So now if I hit V, right, now those are going to vanish as well with the rest of my skeleton. And let's go ahead and add these curves to their own display layer as well. So I can just scroll out, drag a huge box to highlight and select everything. And I might be grabbing some of my handles, so if we're having those issues, let's see here. I think I can turn off miscellaneous objects. Nope, I can turn off everything except for curves then. Drag a box to select. Now I have all of my curves. I can go over to my display layer, right? It says create a new layer and assign selected objects, so that brings everything that I have selected in. Click on that. Rename my layer, girl CTL underscore LYR. I go ahead and hit save. So now I can hide my controls as well. If I'm an animator, right, I can even very quickly toggle off this P so that when I go into playback, all of my curves will disappear, but if I need to go back into the scene and start making adjustments, I can, do so. One last thing to note here, right, about adding our control curves to that layer is that if I go in and grab my IK-FK switch these to FK, and turn off the visibility for my controls, oh, it looks like they still went, actually. Sometimes, if you're not careful, you might miss grabbing those IK-FK controls, but I am pleasantly surprised, so our rig is set up appropriately, but that might be something worth checking. All right, so the very, very last thing that we want to do to clean up our rig is maybe add a little bit of color into our control curves. So right now they're all blue, right? They're all that dark blue, which may not stand out against a background depending on what you're working with, or if you're in a set that has materials, you might have difficulty picking those at. So we can just go ahead and use some of our different control curves scripts to help add those colors. And I'll go over a couple of different ways to do this too, so if you don't have that script, you can also use this method. But first, the easy way. All you have to do is open our control curves, select a curve that you want to color, and then over here where it says control colors, you can just click on an option. So if I want this to be red, I click on it, bam, my control curve is red. So, maybe I want to have this be a brighter blue for my base and have the outside be, golden yellow. And repeat that sort of thinking on the way up. I will say something that a lot of riggers will do is that they will color the left side differently from the right side, so you can easily tell at a glance. We'll use the colors red and green for that, but keep working our way up. We'll go ahead and change my spine controls, all of our center controls to be blue except for our left and right eye. So, I'll grab my spine 1, hold down shift, grab spine 2, hold down shift and grab spine 3. Is that for our neck, our jaw, and the original eyes. Not the actual individuals, right, but the original control that controls both of them. I'll just click on this bright blue. and now they're all blue. And keeping with tradition, I'll go ahead and make my left side controls green and my right side controls red, because usually I do, right for R or red for R. So I'll grab my left eye control, click this lime green, my right control, make it red. If you want to change the color of green that you use, right, that's perfectly valid. Right now, the color of a selected object is just a minty green, and we have a vibrant green, so it might be tough to tell. So if you want to change this to, something a little more verdant, you can absolutely do that. But honestly, I think the bright green stands out pretty well. Let's go ahead and take this logic to the rest of our controls on the left and right side. So I'll grab my FK shoulder groups, hold down Shift, and go all the way down. And, I might even hold down Control Shift to add to my selection, drag a box around my hands as well, make these all green, and do the same for our FK control curves. Drag a box, make that green. Let's see here. Looks like it's throwing a fit. I might have to go in one at a time. Or this might be because I'm locked. I grab the overarching text group. Can't color control. I'm guessing that's a no. That's all right. So this is a good point to show how we can go ahead and go in and override that through not using our control script. So I'll select this curve that I want to change. And with that selected, I'll go over to my attribute editor. And I want to go down to the object display menu. If you don't see this right, and you don't see this menu that I have, you're probably on the actual tab for the object. Let's see here. And yeah, so this is where we wouldn't find it. I don't think we would be in the shape tab. So under object display, we would go down to drawing overrides, enable overrides, and we would just change our color. We can drag this slider around, and now it has become green. And hold down Shift and grab both those controls. Use that same option of enabling overrides, dragging this until I find my lime green. And now they're there. Right. So yeah, if your controls curve script isn't working, that's one way that you can get around it. Let's go ahead and apply this to the pole vectors and the feet too. Go ahead and bring back my control curve script. Just click the green button so they all become green. Looks like we're just about done here. All right, so let's go ahead and make our right side red. So I'll use Shift to go through and grab everything that I need and drag a box with Control Shift. Here's just red. Looks like it grabbed everything. It's probably going to still not allow us to do our FK lettering, right? So I'll come back to that after I get my foot in my pole vector. Change it to red. And then let's go ahead and go in here, close our BS controls. Over in the Shape tab of our attribute editor, we want to toggle on Enable Overrides underneath the Drawing Overrides menu, which again is underneath Object Display, and change the color to that red color. Alrighty, and now, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, we have a fully functional rig that's ready for animation production. A couple of notes to think, right, are that you might want to adjust how you have some of the parenting. If you really wanted to change where the IK controls sit on this, right, you might make them a child of the master control, but, leave them outside of the hierarchy of your, your big group. So what I mean by that, right, is if I go in and go find my, let's see, your foot controls, and instead make them a child of my master control, that will make it so that I can grab my root control, push her down, but she'll actually squat. But we still have this master control set up so it can still move everything around. Zero that out. And even repeat the same thing with our IK controls. I might even go through here and test some things out. Oh, this is why I did it, right? Because right now I still need to change my colors on the curves for my IK controls. So I'll go ahead and bring my VS curves back. Shift select what I need to be green. Shift select what I need to be red. If I had to take a gander, I'll still need to use my attribute editor to override the colors over here. Go over to the attribute editor with my eye selected. And under the shape tab, right, not the actual tab for the curve, I'm going to enable those drawing overrides. Come over to green. And do that for the rest of my K and IK. And repeat that process for the reds on the right side. So this is what I mean by going through and testing things, right? I'm going to go ahead and make sure that everything is set up. So I want to go ahead and, test my different controls to make sure that everything's working. Go ahead and go back to object orientation so I can move this appropriately. Still move things around. And again, going back to that parenting thing, right, I can go ahead and grab my LT and RT IK wrist controls. Instead of making them a child of my root control group, I can just make them a child of my master control group. So again, if I move this around, right, my IK hands will still stay in space, but my master control will catch everything for me. So how you have that set up is entirely up to you. I think it might be useful to have those IK controls hanging out. So, I can have this root control do everything, but I can still have her crouch. And, you might even want to think about how you can get more advanced with this, right? Is that you can make these IK and FK control groups constrained to either the master control or either, your arms or the root control. So you can build a switch for that and even add an attribute here like in our master control. So you could totally use creative things that we've gone over in class and use those techniques to build a rig that will fully meet your needs. But again, go ahead and go through and test everything out, right? I'm going to go make sure that my IK-FK switches are still working and that they still pose out, but in theory they still should. And move my pole vectors. Mess with my feet a little bit. Move those out. And now I can very quickly pose my rig as opposed to going through with those joints layers and getting things set up. Go ahead and zero out all my controls. So again, I can go through and shift select everything, right? Zero out the translate, rotates, and scale, and we'll all snap back to our original position. So congratulations, you've done it. You've created a fully fledged production-ready rig. Go ahead and use this knowledge to the best of your ability. You can take this, to other programs too. You can take it to Blender, you can take it to Unity, you can take it to Unreal, and those fundamentals will still transfer over. But for now, let's go ahead and call it there. I'll go ahead and zero these back out. And you have a fully fledged girl rig. So just a reminder, right? If you've been working alongside me in class, you're probably caught up, but turn in your girl rig as well as your boy rig. So work on the boy as homework, but the girl as our in-class work. And go ahead and submit this for your final when the time is right. I'll probably post a couple of videos of like some next steps or some ideas or, a couple tools that didn't really fit into the semester but might be useful for us to help us build our rig out. That said, that's all I have for you. Enjoy your fully fledged rig, and if you do, end up doing any animations with them, show us what it looks like. That's all I've got for you for now, so I'll see you later, and I hope this was helpful. Hey, I'm back with a very, very brief addendum. Just a quick note about skin weights, right? You saw as I was working earlier that if I move my eyes around, I was still having issues with some of the skin weights on my girl. I might have some weirdness. The good thing about skin weights is that we can go through and paint skin weights pretty much whenever. Unlike with our Delta Mush stuff or some of these other things, it's not necessarily baked in. I already have this set up so I can toggle off the controls for my layer. Go ahead and turn on my selections again. And I can go ahead and right click and go back to my paint weights tool, and I can go in and fix things out. So, the big deal that we had earlier, like with our eyes, I might go in here, solo out the girl geometry, and with symmetry on, good. I just might need to go back in here, double click to grab this, grab the first vertex, double click the neighbor to grow into a ring, and expand this out. Control Shift I to invert my selection, and go back into the component editor to make sure that my LT and RTI aren't having any influence over the mesh. Let's see here. It looks right. So again, I might go through and fix this out. Let's go over the RT, EYE. Bam. So again, skin weights are tied to specifically the joints that are bound to the skin. So as long as we don't bind skin again, with like a reverse toe setup or anything else that we've added after the fact, it'll be okay. So just wanted to add that quick addendum in, right? That we can pretty much go through and paint skin weights whenever we'd want. It's okay that that's sort of, not locked behind anything, because animators would have to try very hard to sort of stumble into the paint weights tool. So now I can go in and double check. And now my eyes aren't moving my jaw or anything else. There might be a little bit of weirdness here that I might have to think about fixing for my lips. But again, that's okay. If I have issues with paint weights, I can go back after the fact and paint those weights. So if you're done with your rig early, but you have some weights issues, I would highly recommend that you go through and check for any places that there might be any actual weights problems. But it looks like, problem spot 4 with Delta Mush is already fixed. But yeah, again, with your paint weights, right, don't forget about your component editor, how to use the menu over here to change our different types that we're doing, if we're adding or we're smoothing, the value that we're adding vertex weight to, as well as our stroke, so we can control the size of our brush. And lastly, right, there's skin, mirror skin weights as well. So if there's some weirdness, you can always run that to help smooth it over. So I just wanted to add that back in. So if you're having issues with weights, you can absolutely put it off. As long as it's mostly working as you're building your rig, so you can test and make sure that your motion looks okay, you can still come back after the fact and paint those in. Workflow wise, it's not ideal. You'd rather knock out your skin weights before you start building any fancy controls on it. So you just don't have to be worried about it. But if you're either lazy like me, or if you're rushing through and you still need to make some adjustments, you can absolutely paint skin weights after the fact. So I just wanted to throw that in there just for you to know. And that's all I have for you. So yeah, that's it.